Hello, everyone, and welcome to this EpiGym webinar on research impact. We're just going to allow people to join, so just give them a few more seconds. But in the meantime, I just wanted to start with some quick housekeeping. First, just to let you know, this session is being recorded, and we will share the link to the recording with everyone who has registered. So look out for an email from us. And you can use the Q&A function, which you might be able to see at the bottom of your screen to send in your questions. Feel free to send your questions throughout the presentations. We'll get to them at the end, but you can start sending them from now on. And also, please feel free to use the chat function if you'd like to chat or share your experience with other participants. So the chat function is open and it's also at the bottom of your screen. So I think numbers are stable right now. So I think we're going to start. So just wanted to first share the agenda for today. We're going to start with some introductions. And then we're going to have a presentation by both our speakers. And we'll move on to a Q&A and then some final remarks. As I said before, feel free to send your questions throughout the session. We'll get to them during the Q&A section. So starting introductions, I just wanted to first introduce us, EpiGym, and just tell you who we are. EpiGym, part of SAGE since 2023, is a leading provider of online training courses designed to help higher education institutions transform their core activities. Developed through the global collaboration of our partner universities, subject experts, and in-house learning designers, our programs are shared by subscription with leading institutions across the world. You can learn more about who we are on the link below. I'll share that after the webinar. So just introducing our speakers today. So first, I am Pia Tissot. I am a Senior Marketing Manager for EpiGym, and joining me today, we have Dr. Tamika Heiden, who is founder and director of the Research Impact Academy, Australia. Educated in knowledge translation and research impact, and with 15 years experience in health research and coordination, Tamika is dedicated to simplifying impact and improving social outcomes for researchers and organizations. Her mission is to ensure research is relevant and accessible. She is a lead advisor for EpiGym's Research Impact, Creating Meaning and Value program. Dr. Josh Gladden is a Temple University's Vice President for Research and has served in that role since 2023. He is the spokesperson for research divisions, which work to facilitate research and research funding, as well as providing support for all funded projects at Temple. Dr. Gladden has led university-wide efforts to promote and facilitate interdisciplinary research teams and innovative research policies. Josh has previously served as Vice Chancellor for Research and Sponsored Programs at the University of Mississippi, Associate Vice Chancellor for Research, and as the Director of the National Center for Physical Acoustics. Without much further ado, I will now turn it over to Tamika to start her presentation. So let me start sharing my slides so she can share hers.
Great, thank you. And while I'm sharing my slides, what might be really good from the audience is maybe just in the chat, just if you want to throw in, what is it that you think of when you think of the word, when you think about research impact, what comes to mind? So if you can just put that in the chat, that'd be really interesting for me to get a bit of a context as well around what you're thinking about. But what I wanted to do for my short time that I have with you before I hand over to Josh was really just to set the scene and give a bit of context around research impact, because even though most people do this already or understand impact, we all understand it in different ways and we're all thinking about different things. So I always like to make sure that we've all got a nice base and a nice understanding of what it is that's on the same page. So thank you for those who have put it in the chat. And if you've still got ideas, just keep putting them in and I'll have a look at those as we go through. But that's really great. Now, so let's start off with slides would be great. So what is impact? Let's start off with talking about what impact is. So when we're talking about impact, there is lots of definitions, lots of different ways of defining it. You go to different countries, you'll have a different definition around every corner. Every funder, every government agency has a different way of defining what it is. So in looking at this session in particular, I thought there were probably two definitions that would be really helpful. First of all, the OECD definition, which is quite descriptive in terms of that positive and negative primary and secondary long-term effects produced by an intervention, directly or indirectly, intended or unintended. So really covering all the bases, positive and negative. Not many definitions really do include the negative in them. And the directly and indirectly and intended and unintended is a really nice way of putting it as well. But the other definition, and probably a bit closer to home for our audience today, is the definition from the National Science Foundation in the US, which has the broader impacts within the funding there. And they define broader impacts as the potential to benefit society and contribute to the achievement of specific desired societal outcomes. So that's very much a beyond academia definition. Most of the definitions you come across are really those societal types of impact. When I speak about impact, I like to think about impact as being both academic, so impact that we have within the academy, and non-academic, being those societal impacts. So whether it's social, health, economic, cultural, there's lots of different ways you can define different types of impact. But one of the things I found in my journey in this space and in growing a business all around impact is that there's a lot of confusion around the two pieces that we need to think about with impact. First of all, we have the creation of impact. How do we create opportunities? How do we get our work out there in a way that's going to get that take up by others? And that's known as the pathway, or sometimes translation. Knowledge translation is a term in the health area. And that's really how we create impact. And then impact is the what. What happened because of this really well-planned pathway, or this way that I shared and disseminated my knowledge to other people. You could think of translation as sort of that independent variable, if you like, and then impact as the dependent variable, if you've got that sort of evaluative mindset. And that really is just saying that impact is really dependent on the efficacy of the translation or the pathway that you are creating to enable that impact to happen. Now, I don't really talk about research impact, and a lot of people do, but I like to think about a much more broader sense of solutions rather than just research. So yes, it's the impact of the research, but I always like to think in terms of greater solutions. So for those of you in the room who are academics, and for those of you who work with academics, ultimately the idea is we want solutions. We do research so that we come up with solutions, and that can be solutions to a problem, a question, to other research. It can be solutions to more societal issues, but ultimately we're looking for solutions. But when we do that, it's not just one thing that creates a solution. There's lots of different pieces of knowledge that come together to form the solutions. So one of those pieces of knowledge happens to be research knowledge. So that's the knowledge that comes out of doing the research, and it's held by the researcher themselves. But there's also practice knowledge, knowledge of what's going on in the practice of undertaking a particular activity, or a career, or whatever it is that people are doing. There's also experiential knowledge. So people who have lived experience about a particular issue will have knowledge that is held by them that probably isn't understood by perhaps policymakers or researchers and other people. You then have organisational knowledge, and this can be around decision-making processes, the bureaucracy that's happening within organisations, what's happening more broadly in the sector around policies, guidelines, changes in government arrangements in that industry. So organisational knowledge is held by people who are working in particular organisations, and so they too have this knowledge that leads into developing solutions. And then you have policy knowledge, and policy knowledge is held by policymakers. What's the timing? When should you send the information? What format do we need it in? What's on the agenda? What's coming up on the agenda? All of those types of pieces of information and knowledge that is held by those policymakers. Now, it's not to say you need every single piece of these knowledges to come together every single time, but it's to say, what other knowledge do we need to grab onto to put together with research knowledge that helps us to create the impact? So if we want to think about pathways, there are some characteristics that have been published around the pathways, around what they include. And really, those are that it includes all the steps between how we create new knowledge and how that knowledge then gets applied in practice, applied in other research, applied by others. It requires multi-directional communication. It's very interactive because it's ultimately a social process. It requires ongoing collaborations among relevant parties. So not just anyone, but the relevant parties. It includes multiple activities. So not just sharing research in a journal article, but what other ways should you do it? Should you write a policy brief, a media release, an infographic, do a video series, do a training program? Should you commercialize something? What else should you be doing? It involves all of those diverse knowledge user groups, as we've just walked through. So what knowledge user groups do you need to have to bring together solutions? And ultimately, it's user and context specific. So it's about understanding the users of the knowledge and understanding the context in which they are living, working, breathing. And it's impact oriented. Getting to impact through these pathways is all about having that impact. So there was some research that was done in, I think, around 2015 in the UK, where they took all these different case studies of impact. They took the most successful pathways and said, what are the common elements of these pathways that make them successful? And what they found is that successful pathways to impact started with a really clear vision between the objectives of the research and the impact they were hoping to achieve. They were very specific. They understood the who, the how, the when of what it was they were trying to achieve and how to get there. They tailor-made both the research itself and the findings from that work to be better shaped around what it was that was needed by those users and those people out in the sector that they're trying to have the impact with or for. They were flexible to people's needs, understanding people, understanding organisations, understanding that other stuff is going on. It's not just what's happening in your world. They had the stakeholders and the users of the research and the people who were going to have benefit from this work had roles and responsibilities as part of that research process. They'd done their market research. They knew who they needed to work with. They knew the best questions to be asking. They knew what gaps there were in the knowledge, and they understood what they could do that would be meaningful. They had really collaborative partnerships with people. They understood the sensitivities, and this can be sensitivities of an organisation, of the timing, of the people themselves, but understanding the sensitivities that you're working within. They took a long-term thinking approach to getting to impact, and really, really importantly, they recorded everything, because as you start to go on that journey of impact, if you're going to evaluate that impact and you're going to evaluate even the process of impact, then you need to record everything and you need to be tracking that so that you can easily evaluate it. So I always like to say that impact is two questions. And I always like to joke about this a bit as well, because having built an entire living around teaching research impact, and I joke a little bit with my husband to say, really my work is all centered around just two questions. So I could have a very short workshop, but instead I managed to turn these things into an entire day. But ultimately there are two questions. So the first one is when I have someone come to me to work around impact and they'll say, Tamika, I've got to write about my impact. I need to work on my impact. What's my impact? And my number one question to them is, who used your work? That's the number one question if you've already had that impact. If you haven't had the impact yet, the question might be, who's likely to use your work if you're thinking forward? And then I'll say to them, okay, so that person used your work. What happened? So what? What came out of that use of your work? They're the two questions. That's impact in its simplest form. Two simple questions. And if you can answer those questions or start to think about those questions, you're well on your way to impact. So why do we want to do impact? And this is a really interesting one to think about. And we've had this across many, many sectors. Some countries have drivers that are, national assessments, funding agencies doing it, and others don't have those. So, we in Australia in particular, we always look to the UK and say, oh, they've got the driver of having a national assessment. We look to Canada, and Canada do knowledge translation and knowledge mobilization. And we look to different places and different assessments that go on, like Hong Kong has an assessment, a national assessment. So does Poland. Spain's introducing a national assessment. They have assessments in the Netherlands. But in other countries, maybe not so much. And I know that right now, sitting in Paris today, where I'm running a workshop, and one of the researchers says, why are we here? What are we doing? We don't do impact. But their major funder asks them about impact. So yes, they do impact. Plus they're in a business school, and business schools now have to write about impact to get their accreditations. So it's coming in all over the place. But why then, if you're talking to academics, or why as researchers? And these are kind of the high level ones. Firstly, because they have to write about research impact in a pathway. So for example, the National Science Foundation in the US, they need to write about broader impacts, potential impacts out of the work that's being funded. Secondly, they want to get funding. So ultimately, even if they're not asking about impact in grants, they really are. They're asking about what's the benefit, what's the potential, why are you doing this work? That's all about impact. So it is coming in everywhere. And particularly if you're getting philanthropic funding, industry funding, they want it to be beyond academia. They want to know what's the benefit of this, what's the impact, why should we invest in this? Ultimately, for researchers, though, they want to make a difference in the world. They want to win awards or discover new things. So ultimately, why do people become researchers, and why do some of you that are here become researchers? Because you want to make a difference, and that's why you do it. I became an academic to change the world, realized I wasn't changing the world, became a consultant. I feel like I'm changing the world now. Or to build career. So some places it's about promotions, and it's about tenure, and it's about being able to put things on your CV. So it's different for different contexts and for different countries. But the thing to do is to acknowledge that there are differences amongst the clients that you have internally. If you're supporting impact or supporting researchers within an organization as in a research management or research administration type of role, the way that you support these people, I would urge you to think about them in three ways, because this is something I've learned over time is really helpful. The first type of researcher that you're going to come across is the inquisitive researcher. So these are the people who want to go into the lab, they want to discover things, and they don't want anyone to bother them. Now, they're a little harder to work with around impact, because ultimately they're into discovery, they're into blue sky science, and they don't really it's harder for them to see what's next when you're just trying to discover and answer a really a blue sky kind of question. The second type of researcher is the researcher like me, wanted to change the world. They're the ones that have come in, they're really doing this because they feel like they can make a big difference on the world in some way. They're a great client for you. They're a great person to work with, because these are the ones who want to have an impact. So it's about facilitating and capturing that impact. And then you have the third type. I call these the Sheldon Coopers, and these are the ones who want to win awards. They want to be known and they want to be rewarded for what they're working on. And they're also a really good client, because that's about impact. It's about having an impact to get rewarded, to get known. So really, out of those three types of researchers, there's two types that are your best ones to work with if you're thinking about how do we do more work in impact? How do we do more on impact? And just finally, I want to finish off by really just outlining how institutions can support the development of an impact culture, and how you can think about moving the needle forward on changing people's perceptions around impact at your own organisations. So these were the ideas that I came up with as I was thinking about this and the work that we've done over the years. The first is you've got to meet the researchers and the academics where they are. What do they care about? Find out what type of researcher they are, find out what they care about, find out what drives them, so that you can work with them to get where they're going and decide whether or not they're a good client to work with. Secondly, outline the benefits of creating impact. Why would they want to do this? What's the benefit for them? What's the benefit more broadly? Connect impact to internal promotions and awards if it's possible. So if there are things that they'll benefit from internally from doing this work, connect to that, because that is a driver for people. Providing the space. You need to provide the space and the time for people to learn about impact and to do this work. And that's something that, you know, I think a lot of organizations struggle with. How do we give them the time to do that? But that would be one way to change that culture. Find champions. People are already having impact. This is not like people are not doing it. It's just that we're probably not raving about it and talking about it and shouting about it from the roof or even evaluating it. So find the people that are already having an impact and doing a really good job of this and make them champions. Showcase how it's helped them to be successful. And remember, not all research is about societal impact. Knowledge impact and impact within academia and having that piece of research being taken up more broadly by other countries and in other ways, or having the data set and the discovery used by other researchers for other reasons is as valuable as having societal impact. But it all depends on the definition that you're working to as well. So I want to finish my session there. That's what I put together, really just to showcase a bit of a background around impact and to give you that sort of starting view of where I'm coming from. And I'll hand over to Josh.
Okay. Tamika, that was amazing. I've got so many things to talk to you about after the show. No, it really was. It really was great. And I hope that these two stories will kind of merge together nicely. So I am pleased to tell you a story. I don't have any slides, but I do hopefully have an interesting story to tell you about the Center for Research Evaluation. And so now, just to be clear, the Center for Research Evaluation, or CEER, as I'll refer to it as I speak, is a unit within the University of Mississippi, not Temple University. So this was in my previous position as Vice Chancellor for Research at the University of Mississippi. So I thought it would be useful, since we do have a number of academics on the line, to give a brief history of the evolution of that organization and some key pivot points in thinking about how do we guide this next iteration for this organization to keep pace with and meet current needs. And so the work, that center really started not as the Center for Research Evaluation, but the Center for Educational Research Evaluation. And it was housed within our University of Mississippi's School of Education. And it did evaluative work, really strictly on education research. So we have developed a new pedagogy for reading. We need to understand and evaluate what the impact of that new pedagogy is. So you sort of get the picture. That was in sort of the 90s, and as most great centers do, they were built on the hard work of individual or small groups of faculty that start to really take off. And then sort of in the early aughts, there were some additional types of research evaluation that was being brought to this team outside of strictly the educational realm. And that evolved for maybe 10 years or so, still living under the School of Education. And then about 2015, 2016, I became the Vice Chancellor. And around that time, the Dean of the School of Education came to me and said, you know, this center probably has a lot more potential, but it really shouldn't live within the School of Education. It really should become what we called there a university center. So this would be a center that reports up through the central leadership, central administration, in this particular case, to my office at the time. And so, which was actually great timing, because that was about the time that we started to see a whole lot of of our federal partners and also our private partners, private sector partners who sponsor a lot of the research and scholarship, really wanting to understand better what is the impact of our investment in your programs. Historically, maybe a chemist would come up with an interesting project. There would be, of course, as Tamika referenced multiple times, if it's NSF, we got to write up a broader impacts. I think many of you will probably identify with the scenario that all often was sort of the last thing on the faculty member's mind is, oh yeah, and I got this broader impacts thing. What do I put there? Well, I'll put something together, and I think not just NSF, but other agencies as well really wanted to see more robust and I will say professional evaluation activities of the particular projects that they were funding. What is the impact? How do we measure it? And how do we document it? Because also at the end of the day, don't forget that all of these agencies get their funding through in the U.S. through congressional appropriations, and those decision makers want to see what the impact is, right? So you can sort of draw that line. So the timing was good, so we also what made the timing good is it was time for a director transition at the time. So we restructured the center, named it to Center for Research Evaluation. We kept the CERE initials because it already had developed a brand recognition, particularly in the state of Mississippi, but also outside to some degree, and we didn't want to mess that up. So we transitioned it to the Center for Research Evaluation and hired a new director, outstanding director named Sarah Mason, an Aussie also, I will point out, Tamika. She and I kind of worked, and others, worked on what the vision is. And it sort of had three different buckets to it. So let me just describe those. So first of all, Sarah was a trained evaluator. So her doctorate was in evaluation. And so she was not just interested in the practice of evaluation, she was interested in the scholarship of evaluation. And it was important to her, and I thought also important to the success of the center to be seen not just as a, let's call it a subcontractor kind of, relationship, but as a true partner to the projects that she was helping evaluate, and to develop scholarship, academic scholarship around the discipline of evaluation, because as we all know, that is part of what helps sort of set your unit as a leader in the field. So that was one piece of it, is I wanted to give her the space her and her team the space to create their own scholarship and do their own research in the field of evaluation. The second piece was to act as a resource within the university to partner with anybody across campus, from the STEM folks to the social science folks, to the education folks, of course, even to the medical school and really anybody on campus, to partner with them from the get-go to help develop and refine and really put in the proposal a strong professional evaluation plan. And this is something Sarah taught me, is that this works best when me and my team are part of at the proposal stage, because the design of the program needs to be structured in a way that it actually can be evaluated in a productive, meaningful way. And so we can help them sort of tweak this or that, or change the other thing in order to, for the final outcome to be able to be obtain a quality evaluation. So that was important. So we did a lot of socialization on campus, and we introduced Sarah to lots of different people, and they were written into the budgets. I might also mention for our university partners that SEER was an entirely soft money organization. They received no hardline budget from the university. So They were very dependent on all of the grants and contracts that they could bring in or be part of. So they were written into the budgets. For the most part, our sponsors were thrilled to see professional evaluators written into the budgets and to see that those strong evaluation plans at the proposal stage. I think that truly helped get our proposals across the finish line to an award. And then the third sort of leg of the stool for SEER's and SEER's success is to not just partner with our internal University of Mississippi people and teams, but also as an external resource for not just the state of Mississippi, but really we all had our eyes on national level partnerships, and made some great success on those fronts too, with partnerships really across the nation, including, I will say, the University of Texas at Austin partnered with us to do an evaluation of a particular program that they had been running for a while. That was a fun project, but it goes on both private sector and public sector partners. And so those were sort of the three legs of the stool. So I'll just sort of end by giving you a sense of where SEER is now and the trajectory that it's been on. So when SEER transitioned into the Center for Research Evaluation and moved out of the School of Education, there were really about 2.5 FTEs, full-time equivalents, that were dedicated to those activities. And the last I checked, SEER had, let me just double check my notes. Yeah, they now have 15 full-time equivalents, plus three graduate. They support 3 graduate students and 1 undergraduate student on a full, let's call it a full-time basis per student. So they've really, just in the span of about 6, 7, maybe 8 years, have really ramped up into, I think, fulfilling what the original vision was. And I didn't really talk about this, but Sarah has also been working at the same time with her national professional groups to organize a university-based evaluators sort of network and consortium, and has had some success there. So I think I'm near the end of time, and that's good because I'm near the end of the story. But I will really, I just want to end this way. This is 100% true. I've been doing this job as a chief research officer for almost 10 years now. One of the best decisions I ever made was hiring Sarah Mason to take over SEER and really not just execute, but develop the vision of what that could be. So with that, I will stop, and happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Josh, for that. And thank you, Tamika, as well. I think it was great to see first establishing what impact is. And, I can see from the comments in the chat that, different people have different views on what it means and how they relate to it. So it was great to have that. And then Josh, thank you so much again for sharing your experience at Mississippi. That's a really fantastic example of success in this area. So I've got a few questions. So I prepared a few questions, and I have just received one question on the Q&A. So feel free to send your questions, everyone. So starting with this one, with so many areas, definitions of research impacts, do you envision a set of common basic metrics to measure? This is not addressed to anyone in particular, so I don't know who would like to take this particular question.
I don't mind. I can start, and Josh, you can add in whatever you like if you want.
Go for it.
Yeah, okay. First, a couple of things. One is it's quite interesting in the impact realm. We don't really like the word measure. It's become a thing that we kind of don't use it. It's a bit like a swear word for us. So now we like to say assess. And the question around metrics, we kind of, yes, metrics are important, but not everything can be measured, as we know. In terms of metrics and indicators, and we need measures that are qualitative and quantitative. So not everything is going to be quantitative. So that's one of the things that's made impact really difficult, is the fact that it's not just a number. And unfortunately, governments love numbers. They want to see dollar signs, and that's all they want to see. But it's much more complex than that. There's different ways of assessing and determining value and determining benefit of anything. So what's really interesting is that to give a bit of context, there are no standard metrics. There's no standard measures. There's no standard ways of describing impact for different disciplines. Basically, that's the short answer. The interesting thing is when they did a study of pathways in the UK, they had 7,000 case studies as an example, right? And all of those case studies were of impact that had already been achieved. And they went through and they looked at that and said, out of those 7,000 case studies, how many different pathways to impact were there? And I think in the latest round, there were over 5,000 different ways of people achieving impact, which means there's 5,000 different ways out of 7,000 case studies of describing, showing, and providing metrics and other indicators around the impact. So there's no one way. It's probably one of the biggest reasons I love impact, is because it's really creative. You have to kind of go, what might be a proxy for that? Or how could we describe that? Or how could we best evidence that we know this happened, but how do we actually show that and prove it? So I kind of like that side of it. I'll let Josh answer from his perspective.
No, I think that's a great answer. I don't have too much to add, except I would say that I just wanted to echo something you said about not all impact can be quantified, right? And so I think, and again, I'm not an evaluator. My role on a good day is to enable good people to do good work. But one of the things that I learned through the SEER team is that that it can't all just be numerical information that they bring in to assess the impact of a particular project. And so they did a lot of conversational work, whether it's focus groups or individual interviews, and then they had all kinds of methodologies to distill those conversations into demonstrable impact that was created out of this particular project that couldn't be rated on a 1 to 5 scale.
Thank you. That's great. There was another question that came in saying, is there any expectation that there will be a national level assessment in the US, or will it mainly be driven by funders? Do you have a sense of where it's going and where the future is for evaluation in the US?
I can jump on
Josh,
that
that's
one.
Definitely your.
Okay.
I've got an idea, but I'm going to leave it to you.
Okay, I'll jump on that because I actually do have a little of experience in this. So I don't honestly know where things stand now, but I will say that I had some conversations after we sort of pivoted SEER, we got the vision. It was clear that this was taking root pretty quickly. And we had conversations with friends in the federal government about kind of exactly this question. Does it make sense, rather than leaving it sort of everything up to the individual agency? So NSF has, not just NSF, but different programs and directorates within NSF have different ideas about what evaluation should be. Should there be sort of an overarching guiding organization that helps sort of drive this? And I don't think that took off, but I also don't think that conversation is dead. And I think there's value in that. To be perfectly honest, we were trying to sort of position SEER to be a partner in what that might look like. So I'm afraid I don't have current information on where that stands, but I do know that that has been a conversation in the government.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is just to say, everything is so transparent now, and governments have to be accountable for where their money is going. We see it with donor organizations. So I do a lot of work with nonprofit donor organizations who want to be able to tell their donors how their money is being spent. So when they're investing in research, they need to show impact from the research. So it's happening in small pockets, in small ways, in different places. A national assessment is messy, it's hard. I don't see it happening in the US in terms of a entirely national assessment. I would say funding. That's what's happened in Australia, and US is much bigger and has a lot more money. But I think in terms of the funders, yes, they will definitely start doing it, because they have to answer. If the government fills their pot, they need to answer to the government to say, this is what our money is spent on and this is what it works with. And as soon as politics gets involved, you got to have impact. That would be the only thing I've noticed in looking at globally at what's going on.
There's a few questions that have come in that are sort of looking for advice. So one of them is, any advice of places that you think are doing this well, or ideas about how to approach this when trying to write institutional policy?
Well, so on the evaluation side, I mean, obviously, I think SEER is doing a great job, but there's others as well. University of Tennessee, Knoxville has a very productive evaluation group, I know, and there's one of the California universities has a really good group too. And of course, there's lots of private sector, great evaluators in the private sector as well, outside of the university setting. Policy, I guess I would have to ask a follow-up question about what is such a policy trying to drive? Is it, if it's, what I would not recommend, let's say, is trying to develop policy that, requires faculty to engage with, say, evaluators. I'm not sure, that maybe not where the questioner was coming from. So maybe some clarification on what type of policy they're thinking about.
Yeah, so if you'd like to send some clarification in the chat, feel free to add there. There's a question here for you, Josh. What was the financial model for the center? How did the center cover the costs involved of proposal development and grants administration without institutional support?
Yes, good question. I could talk all day about this. So the way that the business model worked for not just SEER, but Pia, in your introduction, you mentioned I was director of the National Center for Physical Acoustics for a while, and that this works under the same business model, which is that it's entirely dependent on grants and contracts that they bring in. So that includes salaries for staff, researchers, travel, everything basically. Now, so there are direct line charges that support that work, supplies, equipment, blah, blah, blah. However, recognizing that there isn't really an operational budget, we also had, in that case, a model where half of the overhead that was generated from those grants and contracts went to that unit. And so those dollars, if in the US, some of you will probably understand, those are more flexible dollars that you can use for administrative staff and, buying extra laptops or computers for people, things like that. And so we use that model to provide them funds through the overhead generated from grants and contracts that they were involved with. Largely that worked pretty well. It is not an easy life for a center director under that model, but it did work. I mean, the National Center for Physical Acoustics was still in existence and had been, I think they just hit 50 years of existence based on that model.
Thank you for that. Tamika, a question for you now. How do you communicate about research that may have small impact initially, but is often just the first link in the chain of research that will result in a major impact years in the future? Do you talk about the immediate impact or the hoped for impact down the road?
Yeah. Good question. If you're talking prospective, so if this is kind of like in a grant proposal and you're talking about potential impact, then I always have I have a model that I use, and that is to say, who's likely to find your work of value or be able to use your work, or who does the work have utility for next? So thinking like one baton pass or baton pass, I'm sorry, the American audience. Think about the one pass. And then if that user is to use it, what's the likely outcome of that down the road? And so being able to step people through the immediate, our partnership with, group A, B, and C, this group has identified that they would be able to embed our findings immediately within their existing workforce, practices, which would enable them to do X, Y, and Z. Other flow-on effects of that could be, and so you're writing this in a step pattern. So first this could happen, then this could happen, then this could happen, and then this could happen, rather than my work will change policy across the world within a sentence. That is not how you do this. So this work has implications for 4 different audiences. The first we're partnering with, who have said they've got this instant, usage. The second, is it's going to take a bit longer. And then the final, groups are a long-term prospect that we'd be working towards doing this, and we'll build our partnerships with them because we can see the value of this, or whatever it might be. So just really talking through it takes a lot of words. That's the thing. But you just have to say who's next, then who's next, then who's next. So what? So what? So what? And that's pretty much the basis of that.
Not really any more to add to that. I will leave that to the expert. But I thought this might be just a second to for me to refer back to Tamika. A couple of your slides really resonated with me because, of course, in the Office of Research, we are also all about innovation and intellectual property, discovery and intellectual property, and then getting those discoveries out into the world through the private sector, for the most part, to create impact. I mean, that's the point, is to get out there and change something. Mm-hmm. And one of the recipes that I've seen be the most successful in this space really mirrors exactly one of your slides, that you get the practitioners, the end users, the people impacted, involved in the research as early as possible. Because time and time again, I've seen amazing discoveries and amazing work that evolved in such a way that is very difficult to then bring it into practice. And there has to be a lot of work there. Where what I've seen a high degree of success is if there's little micro adjustments along the way to still get that end results, but in a way that is then an easy handoff. Now you've got a cleaner pathway, a quicker pathway to an impactful result. Yeah. So absolutely. just some of your slides about the partnerships and the pieces and the knowledge bases that come from the different perspectives is so important.
Yeah, and that's an interesting one because, I always say that this is a completely social process, and there's actually been some, so it's all about people, I get some hardcore mathematicians kind of go, oh my God, I'm not talking to anyone. But ultimately, there was some research that was done that showed that the likelihood of someone using your research evidence is based more on the strength of your relationship with that person than the strength of the evidence. That's really scary, but just goes to show trust is absolutely vital, and relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had a couple of questions about some ethical considerations and academic integrity. So I just wanted to address this, and maybe you both can give your opinion. But how can researchers balance the pursuit of high impact with maintaining academic integrity and avoiding practices that might inflate impact metrics? And also, are there any particular ethical considerations to keep in mind when focusing on increasing impact?
You want me to start?
Go for it.
Oh, okay. Because I have a couple of thoughts on this. So, and when the questioner refers to academic integrity, what I'm reading there is to a true objective, production of information, and this is where I think it's quite important for the group that is doing the evaluation to not be the same group that is doing the work, right? So this is where you do get into some problems in what I'll call an older model, where that chemistry professor I referred to before is also somehow leading the evaluation efforts. Now, when you have those external evaluators that are bringing a deep discipline ethics to their work, I will tell you, and I've had to manage some difficult conversations with the people doing the work and the evaluators who didn't quite fund the impact that was originally envisioned. And so, but I think it's a very good point to bring up, because some degree of separation between those two activities, the development of the work and the evaluation of the work, it needs to be in place, and critically, it needs to be supported by the leadership, and that's a piece that's important.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add is, if you're writing a pathway to impact in a proposal, like a broader impact statement is a pathway, then you just don't want to overinflate. It needs to be logical. It needs to be believable and logical that you have partnerships in place. So you need to have detail around that. If you're claiming impact and you're worried about overclaiming, if you can't evidence it, then you're overclaiming. And that's the simple proof. That's the simple thing about it. And people say, what's evidence? And evidence is proof. Evidence is not what changed. Evidence is, how do you know that changed, and can you prove it? And usually it's written. It's a written document. It's a testimonial. It's a report. That's the proof.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think one of the things that we at EpiGM we focus a lot on is on culture, creating a culture of impact. And I'd love for both of you to sort of share a little bit about your experience of working with academics and sort of creating that culture, not, everyone kind of coming together and accepting that research impact is important and we should put time and money into it. And how do you create that culture, and what has been your experience, Tamika and Josh?
The culture one is such a bad question, but not that your question is bad, Pia. Sorry, didn't come out right. But it's just an ongoing debate, culture. And I think, to be honest, I think academics are sick of hearing about culture and culture change. I think having worked with so many people now and having sort of seen this be thrown around a lot, I think one of the things I would just say is, do really good research and do it for a really good reason. And that's from the researcher side, right? So their culture. But the problem is that culture is only enabled if the institution's policies, if the institution's reward mechanisms and the time that people get matches that. And what happens with culture is there's a mismatch. What funders will fund, what organizations will reward, doesn't match up with do great research that's meaningful.
Yeah. I'll say that I'll echo the policies and reward mechanisms and how important those are to promote. And when I hear, and I've tried to manage, culture change in lots of different flavors in an academic institution, and one of the biggest ones is that as academics, and I'm a physicist by training, came up through the physics department, and so I know this from some experience. I mean, it's everyone is very focused on their tenure and promotion and getting their scholarship done, and in one of those three buckets that Tamika nicely sort of laid out, the type of partners that she has recognized, and all that resonated well with me. But to sort of help those individuals sort of understand that they are also, as important as their work is, they are also part of a large ecosystem of scholars doing amazing things. And so, do you have the programs to enable, in some low barrier for entry way, to get those people connected, just create collision spaces, right? So this is maybe not policy, but it's programmatic stuff that needs to happen at a leadership level, probably outside the school or college. So that's part of it. And then the other part that's happening, but is more difficult, is the tenure and promotion criteria. What sort of activities are going to be counted and assessed as being impactful academic activities, or let's say activities for an academic? Is it, because traditionally it's, well, publish these papers, I get these grants, I produce these PhD students, and my teaching evaluations are good. Okay, so that's great, and that's impactful, right? We've created impact for centuries. But times are changing, and so if we get someone who develops an amazing podcast in a particular area that has really touched a lot of people, how is that evaluated? I mean, should we assess that? Should we build somehow that into decisions about whether to promote this person or tenure this person? And those are harder conversations, but they are happening. And I'll leave you with this and stop talking, but there is a organization run out of University of Oregon called the PTIE, the Promotion and Tenure Innovation Entrepreneurial Group. It's about, at the time that I was involved in it, it was about 70 universities, really trying, from lots of different people from within those universities, to try and come together with some recommendations to individual departments and deans and provosts and so on about how you might think about folding this stuff in. So a lot of conversation going on there, but the reward structures and the policies are critical.
Yeah, that sounds good. We are running out of time, so I'll end with one question, which I'd love both your opinions on. So this is, Kevin has asked, I'm a recently started research impact librarian. Do you have any advice for someone new in the field? So I just wanted to get your advice for someone who's starting in the field of impact. What are the things to consider? What are the things that you have learned over the many years working in this? And any final thoughts that you might want to share today?
Okay, so look, Kevin, great question. There's a lot of information out there. Even as somebody who works in this space, I still look to examples of impact case studies in the UK. There's a library now of 14,000 case studies. Just look up REF 2014 or REF 2021, and you will find 7,000 each year case studies thereabouts that talk about impact across all different disciplines. And it's a really good, look, they're not all great because they don't tell you which ones are the best ones, but it's a really good place to start to get a feel. What does impact look like in different disciplines? What sort of indicators are they using? That sort of stuff. But I'd also like to tie this answer to another question that was in there as well, if I can, and that is around the tools, because as a librarian, I'm always referring people, I'm saying, go to see your librarian. Your librarian is a tool. We won't say that, but a great resource. Now, the ones that and I'll just rattle these off really quickly, but the kind of the tools that we always talk about are to assess and to track and to look at impact. So we look at alt metrics. So we get to see who's using the work, Is it being cited, you know, in the media? Is it getting Wikipedia, patents, policies, etc.? We use Open Syllabus, which looks at whether or not any of the work's been cited in books and textbooks and things like that. We use Lens, lens.org, which is, it shows you whether or not your work's been used in patents and who the company was and that sort of stuff. We use another one that's really cool called cite.ai, SCITE.ai, which tells you the context in which people are citing your academic work, which is really cool as well. So if you publish a method and it's used in someone else's methodology, perhaps that's a great impact. They're using your method. And another one that, just a shout out, also totally unexpected to do this, but I also recommend Sage Policy Profiles, because if you put your ORCID ID in, it links to another tool that I love, which is overton.io, which you know, tells you whether or not you're having any policy impacts. So it's another place to go and find, and the Sage Policy Profiles are a really great tool. I really love that one. So I think, things like WorldCat tells you how many library holdings of books. Look, there's all these sorts of tools that will give you, where do I go further to look? Where should I explore? What sorts of ways are people talking about my work and using that? So I'll just leave it at that point. And I think as a librarian, Kevin, some of those are going to be really important for you to kind of get in your wheelhouse as well, so you can help people with that.
And the only thing I would say on that front, Kevin, is that get out on campus and create those relationships that Tamika was talking about, because all of that wonderful knowledge that you will accumulate and you're in the process of accumulating, it's got to get disseminated, and that can only happen you know, if you form the relationship. So put energy into that. Invite yourself to stuff. I mean, seriously.
Yes. I think that's a great place for us to stop. So thank you so much, both Tamika and Josh, for your time today. I think it was great to hear your different experiences and all the advice that you had. We're sorry we couldn't answer all the questions. There's still a few questions in the Q&A, so we might take a look at them after and answer them in a blog post or something like that and share it with people who participated. But yes, just wanted to thank everyone who attended, and we'll share the recording in the next couple of days. And yeah, I think that's all. So thank you so much and have a lovely rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.